Good evening, sir.
Yo, this is episode 68 of the Beef and Bitcoin podcast with your host, Brett and CH. Today's topics, looks like we have a new stablecoin from the makers of Tether popping up, Tether Gold. So we'll talk about that. Our good friend Peter Schiff lost all of his Bitcoin, which is not a surprise. I've actually been waiting for this day for a very long time, and it finally happened. So we'll go over, what Peter Schiff has been saying for the last couple of days and his whole story about how he lost his Bitcoin. And then last but not least, as we've been talking about for the last couple months here, central bank digital currencies were a big topic at Davos, or enough of a topic to grab a little bit of attention here in the last week or two. So we'll go ahead and talk about that. But it's been a pretty wild week since the last time we talked, man. What's been going on?
Shit's hitting the fan. I'm just gonna put it there. I think we got our Black Swan event. I mean, we talked about the other night. I think, at least I said, I was like, I think this is our Black Swan finally. If this isn't a Black Swan, then I don't know what it is. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess we didn't mention this last week. There's the coronavirus has picked up steam, and it's interesting to the point of it's a very big global macro event, right? If you have like a contagion that's running rampant globally, and it's starting to spread, has that longer incubation period and time frame, and you can't really trust all the news sources that are coming out of wherever they're coming from. Very difficult to trust those. What does that mean for the global economy when you have China shutting down 7 to 10 major cities, a few dozens of millions of people under quarantine, limited access to planes going in and out of the country. There's been a few cases in the U.S. and other countries, so it's still very early in the whole coronavirus news cycle and what's been going on. But it's scary because it has global implications when economic activity can kind of slow down because of something like that. So I think that's where it makes sense, as that interesting kind of black swan type event.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on with this, and I think the biggest thing is, like, can we trust the Chinese numbers? Someone said something pretty funny on Fin Twitter, and it's like everyone in finance knows you can't trust, Chinese, any of their numbers, accounting, finance, etc. It's like, why would you trust their healthcare system? I mean, like, anyone who's been following this at all on Twitter, you're seeing a lot of shit. Like, you're seeing, like, I saw people walking around the streets. It said Wuhan, and people literally just falling over and face planting first, and people who were infected, and then just bleeding there. It was like, holy shit, what is going on here? And I think this is a perfect example of, like, they have pretty good suppression of social media over there, so I'm sure it's taken a while for a lot of this to disseminate, and I think it just became an overwhelming force, because earlier this week it wasn't that big of a deal. Like 7 days ago, last Sunday, people were talking about it, but it wasn't the same as by Friday, or today really, too. And I think that now, obviously, I've heard things, I don't know for sure, people said mutation, R naught number growing, which R naught means the amount that it reproduces at. And if you haven't seen the movie Contagion, you can just watch that. That movie does a pretty good job of explaining everything pretty well. And it's just a movie, but still, in terms of what's happening, and it did in the movie, it starts in Hong Kong, and in this case, it starts in Wuhan, China. Interesting thing is, like, Hong Kong, for instance, is like basically no schools going on. Like, they're extending the New Year, because it's the big thing for China too, in terms of an economic global macro. The Lunar New Year is a huge, obviously money deal. It'd be like in the U.S., like Christmas or Thanksgiving. Like, if we weren't allowed to travel or do shit, it would devastate our economy, dude. It would be devastating, and that's what's happening in China right now.
Right, and it's interesting, because as we've been talking about global macro for over a year now, it's like kind of an interesting backdrop of a new piece of news to just put together to the puzzle piece. And it's actually, I'm kind of interested to see how Bitcoin responds to this kind of stuff. It's moved up a little bit, I guess, in the last, just today actually,
3%.
But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if any news of that is related, because it is over the weekend now. Do you need to make moves over the weekend? Markets are closed. I mean, who knows what tomorrow has to offer? I guess we'll talk about that on the next episode. But you really never know. And with this kind of stuff, it does take a little bit longer to get more information that seems more accurate. So like everybody's kind of in this weird waiting period where it's like, what do you do in the meantime? Because you really just don't know.
Agreed. It's what tomorrow beholds for us in this week, as we always talk about. We never know what's going to happen next week, and now it feels like we have our black swan. It's like, where do we go from here? It's 2020. We have this year's election. Kobe Bryant just died. What the fuck is going on? And then also we have rockets getting launched into Baghdad. And like you and I were talking about this earlier, like it happened once. I think like 4 rockets said, and then it happened later in 3 rockets. And I saw, I think an embassy personnel got injured or something like that, a U.S. embassy, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised that that embassy hasn't been evacuated at this point. But
yeah, no, it's been a pretty wild day. R.I.P. Kobe. That, I mean, it really sucks. That was a shocker today.
No, and his daughter was in that. I mean, there's 9 people total, but his daughter was in, which is terrible. She's 13 years old.
Yeah, it's a shame. It really sucks.
Yeah, that's.
So big hug your family thoughts with the Bryant family for sure. When you think about this global macro and the release of Tether Gold from the makers of Tether stablecoin, we've been talking about stablecoins for a while now, and I mean, I guess this was inevitable, right? You wanted to have this digital exposure to gold, tied to the physical asset somewhere. And in this case, Tether Gold is going to be backed by gold bars housed in a vault in Switzerland, whatever that means. And each XAUT token will represent ownership of 1 troy fine ounce of physical gold. And it looks like it's going to be available as an ERC20 token and the TRC20 token on top of Tron. Unbelievable.
Jesus.
And it can be used in a Tether wallet. Yeah, it's on one hand,
tough.
Yeah, on one hand, I think we're seeing there's a marketplace for stablecoins and different kinds of stablecoins. And you had said right before we started recording, like, oh well, what's to stop from like a Tether Silver or Tether Palladium or Tether whatever you want to back it, Tether Oil. I mean,
yeah.
As much as I think those might not be the best ideas, the interesting part about it is it's doable. Like
Pandora's box has been opened, dude.
Right, like go for it, and the market will tell you whether or not that ends up being a good idea. If it ends up being adopted by enough people who end up using it. But the one thing I was reminded of is that when you digitize something that's physical, it's going to have the same security flaws that we've had in the past, right? That you need to trust that central party holding the gold or whatever else to not debase the currency. And as we've known historically, very rarely do the people that you're trusting to not debase the currency actually not do that, right? So what's to say there's more there's more Tether Gold issued than the amount of gold that's actually backing it, or if there were Tether Silver, the same deal. And we know that already happened with gold in the central banks and debasing the currency. So that's the fundamental flaw when you're digitizing something that is physical in nature that you're using to back it. So I don't know. Do you think this stablecoin trend is going to continue? We're going to see other things digitized?
I mean, I think it's, again, as I said, like it's a Pandora's box thing. I think it's going to continue for a while at least. I mean, think about how relatively new this is. And even though I know you disagree more than I do, I think it's just something that is, unless you enforce it, people are going to keep doing it. And then I guess Tether sees there's possibly demand for this. And maybe they'll see and as I mentioned before, podcast, and you just mentioned, Tether Gold gets a lot of interest. Why not do as Tether Silver, Tether Platinum, Tether Palladium? You said Tether Oil. I mean, you name it, and they could go down a list of different types of commodities you could back. I mean, it's an interesting thought, and the only thing I wonder is putting on ERC20 and TRC20 tokens, so Ethereum and the Tron blockchain. are those sustainable?
Right.
You know, I don't even. I don't think. How does Tron's consensus system work? It's not mining, is it? Anymore?
I want to say it's some sort of proof of stake type
Yeah.
of system, and we've already seen Tether issued on top of Bitcoin via the liquid sidechain, and that makes sense. It's with Bitcoin, you've got a little bit of that slow and steady wins the race kind of development process where you want to be able to issue assets on top of it. That's great. You can use the liquid sidechain, but it's just not there yet, right? It's going to take a lot of time, and it's and at this point, I don't get upset about this kind of stuff. Like, issue Tether Gold, let the market see if there's demand for that. If it's useful, people are going to use it. The other way you can think about it is there's many different gold warehousing services that you can use today, and they're very expensive. And Tether Gold might be a cheaper option than paying somebody else to store your gold in a vault in Switzerland as opposed to Tether. Maybe Tether's the easier option for you, and you can use that as your stable coin. That's fine. If anything, it's just competing. It's a non-regulatory digitized commodity that's competing with the regulated entities, right? Those gold warehousing services, and it's going to be way cheaper. So I think if anything, it's just a good way to bring more competition to that marketplace. And it's a good thing overall. They need to keep doing this kind of stuff to see if there is actually demand for it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. It doesn't say when it's going to be out. I assume that is it up already? It says we are pleased to edition new product. I don't know if it's already actually up. Do you know if it is?
I think it's launched, but I don't know how much usage it has received yet. But I mean, I'm sure as the usage starts to increase, it'll be another topic for us to touch on in the future. And you can probably check that Etherscan address, see what it looks like. But
price zero
total
supply like 3,990, 4 addresses.
Yeah, so I don't think they've said too much about how much gold do they have already locked in. I'm assuming you'd pre-purchase all this gold, throw it in this vault, and then from there you can figure out how much Tether Gold you're going to issue after the fact. But I mean, it is interesting to see these kinds of things happen, and with all of the additional stablecoins that have launched throughout the past 2 years or so, Tether's still the most widely used, like by a large margin. Everybody who's at least interested in trading cryptocurrencies most likely has some exposure to Tether, and they keep some of their assets in Tether. So they use that, and not USDC or any of these other stable shit coins. They want Old Faithful, right? They want to go with the Tether, and Tether's it's a strong name behind it. Like, people surprisingly trust Tether.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been around for a while, and it's what people use, as their digital stable coin. I was just going to read this from the Tether or gold.tether.to. If you go to Tether website, I assume it's like the top right tab. It says gold allocation lookup. Each Tether Gold coin represents ownership of 1 troy fine ounce of physical gold. To identify the specific gold bars or gold bar, or S in parentheses, and number of ounces of gold you hold on each bar, enter the address that holds your XAUT tokens below. And then there's an Ethereum address, look up. You know what? Shit, I need to go back. I can try it in the contract address. Let's see what happens. I'm just curious to see if this actually works. Wow, there you go. So yeah, if you actually use the right address, it works.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be expected. I wouldn't expect anything less.
Never know. You never know nowadays. Like, seriously, you never know.
Yeah, people don't check. That's a good point. People don't
there's
check this kind of
times
stuff.
Yeah, no, I've seen wacky shit before like that, where it wouldn't have shown up. That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah, so I don't know. My thoughts are, and we'll touch on this at a later topic with, central bank digital currencies being talked about, digital stable coins. Is this the real digital gold? Other digitized commodities. I just have a sense we're heading in that direction, and that's okay.
It makes sense.
It totally makes sense. Push the ball forward. The more it's kind of normalized,
Yeah.
the more people won't balk at using Bitcoin as a store of value. Like, you know what I mean? That kind
It's
of.
too easy, dude. Think about this. They're already ahead in the game, dude. They already have regular USDT. Oh, we're just gonna do XAUT, and how much are they gonna attract? It'll be easy for if they actually do it right and they actually have gold held in some Swiss bank or whatever, and they can prove it all the time. They could crush it here, and then obviously that will lead to other areas. I mean, I just opened up the Tether thing. You can log into your Tether account.
No, I mean that's
So
if you are someone who's this is what I'm thinking. If you're someone who's never invested before, and the first thing that you're investing in is the cryptocurrency space, and all of a sudden you decide you want exposure to gold, and you have enough to buy your one Tether Gold or whatever for 1 troy ounce. I mean, maybe you go for that rather than figuring out a different way to get exposure to gold. It's competing against the other gold exposure providers. So there's definitely nothing wrong with that, and it's just interesting to. I guess I didn't suspect that a couple years ago, but now it seems obvious at this point in time.
yeah, I mean, I didn't know this was coming along. But it makes sense. Tether's already, as I said, like they've already got that foot in the door. They've been doing this for a while with USDT. So you think it's time to rip into Skiff?
Yeah, dude. So Peter Schiff, I guess this whole thing started about a week and a half ago or so, when I think it was using like a blockchain.info wallet on his phone, and that's where all of his Bitcoin was stored. And apparently Eric Voorhees had helped him set this up probably a few years ago. And he tweets and says, "I've lost everything. All my Bitcoin is gone. All the Bitcoin he ever owned." Right. So his wallet got corrupted. His password's no longer valid. So not only is his Bitcoin intrinsically worthless, it has no market value either. I knew owning Bitcoin was a bad idea. I just never realized it was this bad. So, I mean, he just got destroyed with the memes, and Boomer loses password and blames Bitcoin, like all this stuff. It was really funny just watching him get trolled. But on the other hand, he makes a good point that Peter's not that stupid, but he also had difficulties with the user experience. Everybody has. It's like petrifying when you send your first Bitcoin transaction, or you're writing down your recovery seed, or all that stuff. Like, the user experience is still not great. So it's not a surprise that someone like Peter would run into issues where he ends up losing all of his Bitcoin. It also turned out that he mistook his PIN for his recovery phrase, right? So he never actually did a full backup where he, wrote down his 12 or 24 words and kept that in a safe place. He just thought his PIN, 1234, was his password for all of his Bitcoin forever. And so somebody made a good point, and maybe you want to jump in on this, but he consistently talks down against Bitcoin, which I don't blame him for. He owns a gold business and has other things to sell that Bitcoin kind of encroaches on. And somebody had made a good point, like, you're the last person who should be talking about Bitcoin when you clearly don't even know how it works, what a recovery seed is, all that good stuff. But on one hand, I sympathize that the user experience still isn't good enough. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree with the user experience, the user interface for a lot of these things is definitely not, like, for people who aren't willing to put in the time, because even there's people, our age, who would struggle, if you told them to go log into like a Bitstamp, buy some Bitcoin and then send it to a wallet.
Right.
Like, that would be,
that's a lot for somebody.
That's a lot, that'd be struggle. We'd be, but here's my thing with Peter Schiff. Why is he always attacks it, and then he always will attack it when, like, Bitcoin bottoms in price or things like that, but he just, like, does this to himself. It's like, dude, you need to not, like, you're setting yourself up here.
He's called the bottoms consistently when it's like, told you Bitcoin was dead again, and then it's like it pumps immediately afterwards. Yeah,
it's almost like he does it on purpose.
Sometimes I feel like it almost does. He almost does, just because he calls it, like, perfectly every single time. and it's like almost not a coincidence at this point. Um, I saw this other tweet from Stephen Smith, who was kind of replying back to Peter Schiff, and I thought this was important to say. He said, "What this episode shows is that self-custody Bitcoin is not yet and may never be safe for people who can't manage passwords/codes. This is a basic digital life skill now." And the last part of that quote about being able to manage passwords and, write down recovery phrases as being like a digital life skill, that kind of hit me. That was interesting. Maybe I'm one of the few in my group of friends who's written down a recovery seed and is comfortable with keeping that safe and protected. But I had never thought about it as a digital life skill. What do you think?
I agree with you there. You put a meme up the other day. I think it was something to do with recovery seed or something along those lines. Or what was the phrase or the 60? Is that what it was? The recovery seed you put up?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Titanic one.
Oh yeah, no, dude. I remember. I took hours of just rewriting like the same notes or whatever. Stuff over on like physical copies. I remember doing that, and it's like, yeah, I don't think it's for everyone. Um, and we think about this like, is this the same to people coding with the internet or coding to email back in the early '90s? Is that like, are we gonna look back and in 10 years, in 2030, is sending Bitcoin just gonna be really easy to the point where anyone can do it?
Right. And I think, we've touched on this many times in many episodes that, there was a time when people didn't think anyone would use email, or that there would be no web pages, or you wouldn't be able to stream a television show or insert a picture into an email, or anybody would be able to sell it, that your grandma wouldn't be able to have a smartphone and send you GIFs and text messages and memes. Like, it would just be impossible because it was too, yeah. And you're bringing up the Paul Krugman quote when he said, like, the internet would never amount to anything more than the fax machine. It's really hard to see these things coming. So right now, you and I have used hardware wallets. We've backed up recovery seeds. We've sent Bitcoin to an exchange and off of it, and it's scary and it's not easy because it's brand new.
No, dude,
right?
you're
It's
just
like,
I just sent a lot of money in the direction. I don't know if I have it. Let's go check. Like, and you see even people who've been on like crypto Twitter for a while. You see, and they're like, every time I still send like. You think about how many times you recheck like the fucking code or the
oh my god,
whatever the transaction address. Holy shit, dude!
Yeah,
People don't even understand. And then having all the 2FA stuff set up, and then having different emails, yada 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 yada. It just goes on forever. It's not for someone who isn't willing to either learn it or already is that smart in that sense. But like. It's still something you have to learn, even if you're really good with computers. You still something kind of new, but It's obviously easier for people who are more tech savvy.
Yeah, and I think the fact that so many people are doing it and the user experience still isn't that great just means like, okay, well then there's still a lot of work to do. And if Bitcoin's already worth $8,000 today and it's not really that usable, then that's great. Like nowhere to go but up at this point. Like you can only make the user experience better. And I think, wallets are starting to improve and, being able to use QR codes that will be more normalized. Like QR codes are super normal in Asia and Japan and China, whereas in the US, people don't even know what a QR code is. So that's just time needs to go by where people get more comfortable scanning QR codes and taking a picture of this and sending information to that, and it'll be a lot more seamless. And for anybody that's used like a cash tag or when you connect with somebody on Snapchat and you have the QR code and it just works instantly, that's a magical thing for somebody to see that for the first time. And I can foresee it just getting way easier. So if the user experience is just really bad right now, I think can only really improve from here.
No, it's only going to go up. Obviously, there's people working on it, and someone's going to make something that's better than the next. It's just going to get easier and easier for the person who isn't tech savvy to use it, or the people who and it's going to give more of a reason to use it, obviously, because it is as we talk about like a bit like right now, in the U.S. no one can send money, wiring whatever. I don't know. Does Zelle work right now? I don't think it does it?
Zelle?
Yeah.
I mean, I typically don't really use Zelle,
I
but
don't. I don't either. I didn't know if it worked on the weekends though.
I'm pretty sure that it does. I haven't tried actually. Now that you mention it, I don't know if Zelle works on the weekends. I'm assuming it does, but maybe you can't do international wires or
Yeah.
something else if I had to guess, but maybe you can, or maybe they just say, okay, we'll take it for you, we'll do that for you, and then it doesn't actually settle until the next day the banks are actually open. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I'm trying to look it up, but I was gonna say it's the same thing with like. Sure, you could like send someone Venmo or Cash App, but it's not them actually receiving the money versus Bitcoin or doing an actual wire or physically handing someone cash or physically handing someone gold.
Yeah, my favorite thing to do is send Bitcoin on the weekend when like you would try to be handling that kind of transaction with your bank and you just can't. And then you're like, oh wow, like I can't believe I can only do certain things with the money in my bank account
It's
from 9 to 5
2020.
Monday
Come
through
on.
Friday. Right. It
Like
it sounds
we're stuck.
stupid until
We're
it
stuck
happens
4
to you.
decades ago.
Yeah.
We're stuck in the '80s, dude. We're stuck in
Yeah.
the '80s.
Yeah.
People don't even think about it. But then again, is this an issue with free money? Is what free money has caused? No progress.
No. That's a good point, right? If the money didn't demand that kind of thing to those kinds of technical solutions to be fixed. But I think that's a good segue into the central bank digital currencies because say central banks start issuing their own digital versions of currencies. They, maybe no paper, there's nothing physically backing them or whatever else. You can start to do things where the legacy technology of Swift and all that stuff, maybe that plays less of a role going forward. And it's like, in quotes, the blockchain enables banking on the weekends. What a fantastic, piece of technology. But as you and I have been talking about for the last couple months, it's like, okay, well, what do you do next as more QE has been happening, even though they're not calling it QE, and central banks across the globe are issuing more currency. You have asset prices inflating across the globe and real estate equities all over the place. What do you do when you need to issue a new currency? And this is where I think all of the hints at central bank digital currencies start to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's the inevitable step forward is what it is at this point. I see. It's as we talked before, first they laugh at you, then they whatever make whatever it is, and eventually they copy you or whatever. I don't know how that statement goes anymore. I forget it, but that's what's happening with crypto. I think it was like 2014, 2015, pretty non-existent. And even before that, obviously, it was only used by, hackers and people who are bad people on the internet, blah, blah, blah. 2016, 2017, there started to be more openness to it. Or 2016, really. And then, obviously, 2017, things went bananas into 2018. But still, there was still this, like, they aren't important. And I think in the last year, we've seen, you and I at least, have seen, like, central banks, maybe a year and a half, really go all in on this whole digital shitcoin.
Right. I mean, there's a couple things. It's the technology that they've been using is pretty old, so it's ripe for an overhaul. And then you have the very obvious war on cash globally happening. So then, what do you do to solve both of those problems at the same time? And there's an opportunity here for central banks to think about issuing their own digital currency. And it looks like at the World Economic Forum, there was a new framework that was debuted for basically that exact purpose. So it can improve the cost and speed, efficiencies of cross-border interbank payments, Ripple, as well as reduce settlement time and counterparty risk. So from just a technology standpoint, even though I consider a lot of these things to really just be databases, they're just upgrading to a new database. It makes sense. Like, why wouldn't you do that? The only problem is there's a big cost to deploying a new technology like that, and it's super expensive. And many of these central banks have like really limited resources. So, are they really going to take the plunge and do that and get it right? I mean, you can't have bugs with money. It's a very tricky thing to start messing with. It's difficult to mess with the money, and hope you don't really mess it up. But I also saw one of the comments was interesting with this is that there are risks, obviously, and one of which was depositors converting the commercial bank deposits to the central bank digital currency. Like you almost have this digital bank run right away. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So if everybody who has an account at whatever bank decides, okay, I want to go and convert all of that into the new central bank digital currency, well, is there enough available? I don't know, because they've lent against what you've put in there so many times because of fractional reserve banking. I thought that was kind of interesting, because it almost like, do you have a hard cap? Like now it's like a digitized piece of technology in a database. Like what's the cap? Is there one? What's the inflation rate? Like all those questions need to be asked then, right?
Yeah, and will there be like a thing like was it blockchain.com or the Ethereum thing where you can check your actual transactions, see who's transacting, who holds what, how many there are in circulation, etc.
Right, that's my point. Like it's almost, if you digitize something to that extent and that transparency, you're also giving up a lot if you're a central bank. Because then
everyone knew what the Federal Reserve was doing.
Right, it's not like you can put in the Federal Reserve public XPub and see all of the currency that's been issued. You can't do that now. That's why Ron Paul was always like, why don't we just audit the Fed? And it's like, well, you can't, because then the cat's out of the bag. Everybody knows that they've printed way more than they've either said or that anyone suspected that they would have. There's no way to double check that. But when you fully digitize something like this, if you go full transparency, then you're stuck. Everyone's going to know what the inflation rate is or what the cap is and what it's been moved to. Or if you hide those amounts, there's other repercussions to that. Maybe there's other privacy trade-offs, or you don't want it to be too private, right? If you're the one issuing the currency, it's interesting because there's trade-offs there if you go in that direction.
Yeah, no, the privacy portion is huge, I think, and that's the big thing that always stands out to me is, like we've talked about before in previous podcasts, the central bank, I'll just say digital shitcoin. I don't know if this is 100% what they're trying to do, but are they trying to jump from the current broken system and just say we fixed, not fixed it, but be able to delay whatever they have going on longer, and now just take so much more control where you can inflate it so much easier.
Right.
Tax, see what everyone's spending money on, etc. And then we also see, as I mentioned before, the hoarding of gold. Is that their last stand? Okay, at least we have physical gold. If all this completely fails, we still, right. Because I don't know if we would go back to a gold standard, immediately. And it's not against. I just think Bitcoin's too early,
right?
In a sense of, not that it wouldn't go up in price per se, but in terms of being adopted in that sense. But maybe I'm wrong. But we still need that, as we talked about earlier in this episode, that UI, that UX. People will buy it and speculate on it, and it will drive the price a lot higher. But it will, unless there's that, solid user base, will it find a base? One would say. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
no. I get what you're saying, and I think if you're a central bank and you want to not see Bitcoin succeed as a global type of money, you'd go back to a gold standard, right? That would be your best form of defense there. And to be honest with you, that's fine too for everybody involved. Anybody who's using the money that then all of a sudden gets tied back to something more sound, everybody benefits. So I think no matter which direction you head, it's a good thing for humanity, right? You want to adopt Bitcoin, great. I think the smaller countries would do that first if they were to choose to do that, right? Like a Thailand or something like that. I'd be like, oh yeah, we're going to put Bitcoin in our basket of what's backing our digital central bank digital currency or whatever. The United States would obviously be last to do that, but if that's not to, if China or Russia decides like, oh, we're gonna we're going to start using gold, and then all of a sudden you have that limitation to the expansion of credit. Well, that's a good thing overall, and it's all bullish in my opinion. Because where do you go from here? Like, if you decide to print your currency and buy hard assets, you risk hyperinflation, which if you start to inflate the currency too much, what do you have to do? Well, you have to raise interest rates. And then what happens if you raise interest rates? More companies go out. You see what I mean? Like, all of that just ends up being bullish for hard assets anyway. So it's not a bad thing. It can just get really messy really quick. So they are now in this weird stalemate where they need to be very cautious of what they do next.
Yeah, and I think you and I both know they can't stop the oncoming. I think we'll see pretty shortly. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think this coronavirus is our black swan. I think this is what might put all this, just cause the shit to hit the proverbial fan in another level. Like, we thought 2008, 2009 was bad, but like, things can get really bad, and people are like, oh, it's not a lot of time. Like, things can be much different in even 2 or 3 months from now. So I know I sound pessimistic and gloom and doomy, but like, people don't understand how fragile the system is we have right now. You talk about, like, if trade starts grinding to a complete halt, financial market's going to shit the bed, and people doesn't think that matters, but the whole of pensions, 401ks, everything is riding on this. Everything.
Yeah.
And someone mentioned earlier, I don't know if I mentioned earlier in the podcast, someone's like, oh, Trump isn't tweeting right now. And it's like, people are like, I wonder why. The stock, the futures right now, equity futures are down like 0.8% last I checked, unless they bounced, which they very well might have. I don't know. No, they didn't bounce. It's still 0.8%. I didn't. But it's so, like, he's not tweeting. And, like, also missiles hit, missiles, I guess rockets, I'd say, like 2 different occasions hit the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, and he's not saying anything there, which makes sense because, we don't know.
What are you gonna say? Yeah.
Yeah, like, it's only gonna hurt the market, and he knows it. So.
No, I think that's a good point. I think every week I feel like it's like, oh, we've been waiting for this moment to happen, and it's crazy how much has progressed over the last 12 months, actually. So, at this point, it's like, all right, well, what do? You just wait and see. And now it's that time again to wait and see.
Yeah. If this is it, it's going to make last year's December look like a fucking breeze.
Yeah, I am looking forward to see what January ends up finishing like. And, we're right into February, and it's off to the races.
Mm-hmm. That's what I see. It's going to be a hell of a time, and I think we're going to see if we can outlast Tesla, most importantly. That's the only goal now. Yep.
We just got to keep recording. Can't quit now.
Yeah, no, if this is it for Tesla, that's going to be I don't know what the backside of this will look like, but you and I have seen plenty of charts, and this could get really ugly. I mean, by the end of the year, we could see, not even, but I don't even want to know what the backside of that vertical launch from 180 to basically 600. It's like 595.
Yeah,
it's incredible. I don't know what that, and everyone knows it's overvalued 1,000x. It's ridiculous. Market cap 101.1 billion, 101 billion, and it was almost 100 and something, 103, 104.
Yeah,
so,
no, it's a lot.
It's ridiculous. It doesn't make money. And again, you and I talk about it's just funny money, and we're going to see the consequences for this. We're going to see the consequences for free money. We're going to probably see the downfall of Tesla here. People think, oh, it's went so much higher, but it's like, this is not sustainable. This is not a permanent plateau. You and I have seen enough charts. You don't even have to be a chartist. If you've seen enough of these charts, you know how this ends.
Right, and I think that's the new paradigm, permanent plateau, that kind of stuff. And it's hard because Tesla's the rare case where you can look at the chart, not know anything about the company, and be like, well, that's interesting. Why is it like this? Then you can get in a Tesla and drive one and be like, wow, these are actually pretty sweet. Not sure if I would buy one, but what an amazing piece of technology. And on the other hand, you have all of the Tesla FUD and CFOs quitting all the time, and customer service issues and weird accounting stuff. And it's like, man, this is just, it's so sketchy. It's like it's the one stock that everybody loves to hate. And, there's a whole group of, Tesla bears on Twitter, and like they've gotten absolutely destroyed in the last 6 months or so.
Tesla
but
it's like dead.
Yeah. It's like, they've gotten completely run over, and it's hard because you can look at some of that stuff and be like, well, I can see how you would look at Tesla and be like, wow, it almost like looks like a scam. But then like the cars exist, and the cars are pretty sweet, and they're all over where I am in California. That's all I see
them all the time right now, dude. They're everywhere.
It's not like people aren't buying them. It's
people
not
are
that.
buying them.
So it's like I think Tesla will be the very interesting like business case to look back on 10 years from now, and to see, one, of course, is like whether or not it's still around, and two, do they ever end up making money where it's like a sustainable company? That's we're gonna find out either way.
Yeah, let's see if Elon sells shares or he just fucking goes down with the ship.
Yeah,
we're in for a hell of a year, dude. We're not even a month in.
Yeah, 2020 it's already pretty fucking nuts. So dude, it's gonna get crazier.
Yeah, this is gonna, dude. If we make it to May, we can still record podcasts in May. The whole world isn't infected with coronavirus, and people can say what they want and say you're being sketchy or you're being paranoid. I don't think I'm being paranoid. I've seen enough stuff on Twitter for the past week to like realize what's being reported is not true, and by like Chinese, they're underreporting numbers vastly. There's no way, things don't add up, and they're saying like more people are getting infected outside of Wuhan where it started. Now, like they're saying like there was like 300 today in Shanghai or something ridiculous, and then it was like, oh, there's only 20 in Wuhan. It's like, what do you mean? There's hospitals full of these sick people, like, and
right.
I don't know, man. We'll know more by the end of the week. That's all I know.
Yeah, we'll definitely touch on it in the next episode for sure.
It is the topic of the year.
Yep.
Coronavirus.
I think that's a good way to wrap it up. This is episode 68 of the Beef and Bitcoin podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Spotify. Shoot us a DM. Let us know what you want us to talk about. Very helpful. And definitely stay safe out there.
Yep.
Peace.